Okay. The Evolution of Cars by Lucas Nicholson and
Ben Erdman.
Rise of the muscle cars in the early 60s. The 60s were sparked with the rise of muscle cars. It started with the 1964 Pontiac GTO with a bigger than the previous 389 cubic inch V8 that produced 325 horsepower with the optional package that included 3 two-barrel carburetors that pushed the power of the GTO to 348 horsepower.
The cubic inch war in the 1960s. Later on in the decade, Ford introduced the Mustang with the high end having a 289 cubic inch V8 producing 271 horsepower. Chevy later introduced the Camaro in 1966 with the 396 cubic inch V8 producing 375 horsepower. To compete with the other car brands, the engines of this decade just got bigger and bigger.
The huge cars of the 1970s. Entering the 1970s, cars got bigger with more displacement, with the Cadillac Eldorado with a 500 cubic inch V8, 8.1 liters, producing 400 horsepower. Later on in the decades, the oil crisis happened, which caused engines to become smaller so the companies could sell more cars to people that were more cost-effective.
Oil crisis and its effect. The 1973 oil crisis did not cause Ford to introduce the Pinto, but it did immediately change how consumers viewed the car. Ford actually released the subcompact Pinto in 1970 with the goal of competing with smaller, more fuel-efficient German and Japanese imports like the Volkswagen Beetle. However, the oil crisis, which began in October 1973, immediately altered the car market by driving up gas prices and pushing American consumers to prioritize fuel economy over size and horsepower.
The 1970s. In the 60s, cars were huge and carefree, but into the 1970s, gas became less available and more expensive. With the oil crisis and more people started to turn to foreign alternatives, which was not good for the American car companies, more and more subcompact and compact cars started to become more from American car companies, which saved the U.S. car economy. Into the 1980s, the oil crisis effect was lessened and muscle cars came back with a twist.
The 1980s. In the 1980s, more muscle cars came back, but in a different form, with the 1980 Ford Mustang that had more options for engines to cover the whole spectrum of buyers. The base model came with a 2.3-liter inline-4 for better gas mileage, and the performance version of the Mustang came with the iconic 5.0-liter V8, which is a stark contrast to the huge engines of the 1960s. Other muscle cars also came back in the same fashion, like the Chevy Camaro and the Dodge Charger. Many of these habits with a smaller engine option have carried on to the muscle cars of the current day.
1980s bigger competition. Like the 1980s Mustang, other muscle cars of that era reappeared in a different form, offering a spectrum of engine options to balance consumer desires for both power and fuel efficiency. General Motors, in particular, followed a similar strategy with the Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Trans Am. The Camaro, a direct competitor of the Mustang, mirrored Ford's approach in the 1980s by offering different engine configurations for various buyer priorities, such as fuel-efficient entry-level model and a performance-oriented V8.
The 1990s. The 1990s came with a bigger technological development in cars and their motors. Engines became smaller and more efficient, but also more powerful. A good example of this is the 1993 Ford Taurus SHO with a 3.2-liter V6 that produced 220 horsepower. This engine was high revving with a red line of 7,300 RPM. This engine showed the American market that engines do not need to be huge to make power.
The competition of the 1990s. In the 1990s, the rivalry between Ford Mustang and GM's F-body platform, Chevrolet Camaro and Pontiac Firebird, was at its peak. The competition drove significant improvements in performance, especially after the introduction of the redesigned Camaro and Firebird in 1993 and the new S95 Mustang in 1994. The gap widened even further in 1998 when GM introduced the revolutionary LS1 engine in the F-bodies, giving them a commanding power lead over the Mustang's GT 4.6-liter engine.